Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today we're going to be talking about a very unique subject. I don't think I've ever had anyone on who's talked about this subject. And this is program 749. So I've been doing this a while. And so please join me in welcoming Jesson Bradshaw to our program today. Welcome, Jesson. How are you doing today?
I'm awesome. Thanks for having me, Deb. Looking forward to an awesome conversation and getting to share a little bit of information with all your listeners and viewers around the world.
Great. Well, let me tell people about you and then we will jump into this. So Jesson Bradshaw is the CEO of Energy Ogre, an electricity management company that uses proprietary systems to ensure its customers are always getting the best prices on their energy and electricity. Energy Ogre has helped over 100,000 Texans save up to 40% on their electricity bills and over 150 million since its funding. So again, Jesson, welcome. How are you doing today?
It's another day in paradise here in Houston. So actually, it's nice that we're above 40 degrees. We've been cold for Houston. So I grew up in El Paso and Calgary, so it's not terrible, but you get so used to you get used to it being warm. You lose your ability to deal with some of the cold weather.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like that here in Atlanta. You know, when I have to find a heavy coat to put on, I'm like, I have a coat. There's a coat. You know, but it definitely makes things challenging. Well, I always like to start the program by asking my guests how they got to where they are today. And I tell you what, yours is obviously going to be a unique story because not too many people start companies like yours. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So, it's interesting. I think the easiest way to start out by telling this story is that whole adage of you're better to be lucky than good.
Okay.
So I happened to fall into this industry right as it was beginning to functionally deregulate at the federal level. Mm-hmm. So like we saw in the US over the years, we had the airlines deregulated, mm-hmm. and then we had the telecommunication infrastructure deregulating, mm-hmm. and we had the same thing happen in the electricity space. Mm-hmm. Natural gas had preceded it, but mm-hmm. Electricity started to change in the mid-90s with some federal rulemaking. And so I was a dumb recent college graduate that was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with myself. I thought I wanted to be a physician, and I ended up taking a job with this small company mm-hmm. that was starting up in this space. And I thought, well, I need to get a real job and mm-hmm. make some money and figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. So happenstance, being fortunate for me, I ended up working for this company that was primarily focused on natural gas trading and scheduling and the logistics around that. And they said, hey, we're starting this electricity related subsidiary because of some of the changes that are happening. We think you might be a good fit. Why don't you go work on that side of the shop? Mm-hmm. So super fortunate. I think I was employee number 9 in that whole strategy. Mm-hmm. And we were one of the first ones in this space. So mm-hmm. it was definitely right time at the right place, and life-changing in so many different ways for me. But that's kind of where I started. And mm-hmm. because it hadn't really existed before, things were getting figured out from scratch. And so the other really kind of interesting part of this is that early on when you're developing these businesses or the industry is starting to try to mature, everyone kind of does a little bit of everything. So you get a lot of exposure to a lot of different parts of those businesses. So I was really fortunate. I had never traded as a commodity trader before, mm-hmm. and I had a chance to learn how to do that. And so I actually ran part of our trading operations, mm-hmm. on a regional basis. And we were one of the, probably the largest 5 commodities traders in that space at the time. And as years went on, we actually started to acquire some independent power producing companies. So we started to buy power generation facilities and put them in our portfolio, as well as the expertise to build new ones and to develop them. And so I was able to translate some of my commercial skill set into how do we administer the power generation side. And so it's interesting. We built new stuff, new clean natural gas fired combined cycle and peaking capacity. And we also inherited a lot of older coal fired capacity, and all these different technologies have their strengths and weaknesses associated with them. So I was really fortunate that I had a chance to, get into the plant side and understand how that all works from a plant operations perspective, as well as all the fuel logistics and everything else. So is it really very fortunate to be, with an organization that if you're young and you weren't getting paid as much as the other folks, they were happy to throw more responsibility at you. If you're too stupid to
you
take
just
more
kept saying, bring it on, bring it on.
We'll take it. Yeah. So you don't know any better when you're starting. So we're really very fortunate to be given the opportunity to get exposure and to have, some really good people to wouldn't say I had good mentors. I mean, I had a couple of folks, but it's really a lot of good examples of exactly how you want to do things, and equally as important, good examples of how you absolutely don't want to do things. So that's kind of what that's sort of where I started my my path into the electricity space, and it's been an interesting ride for sure.
I bet. Well, let's do a little basic question. What does deregulated mean?
Well, so there's a couple of different meanings of that. So I think there's an important distinction to be made between kind of wholesale deregulation and then retail deregulation.
Okay.
These tend to be kind of two different things. And so what happened in the mid 90s is we were deregulating basically at the wholesale level. And so what that meant was, in the past, it was very difficult for, let's say you wanted to build a new power plant in an area because there was a good economic opportunity to do so in certain parts of the United States. In a lot of parts of the country, you had to get a certificate of convenience and public necessity in order to build that power plant, in addition to the other permits, the air permits, and some of those other types of things. And also, if you were to build that plant, that would be heavily regulated in terms of what you could actually charge for your output. And so it really was constraining in terms of what the economic opportunity was for someone to come in and solve a problem, solve a capacity constraint problem in a particular area. It's because prior to that, a lot of the investor-owned utilities or the vertically integrated utilities, they were very much in control of their service territories, and anything that happened within them, they wanted to control it from a beginning to end perspective. But what happened in the 90s was the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, they put out some new rulemaking, and it was around open access to the transmission system, to the transmission infrastructure. And so at the same time, they also allowed independent power producers to have what they call market-based rate authority. So it was no longer a cost plus type structure. They gave them the ability to price on a market basis their output of their electricity. So now we had the ability for people to come in and build. They also couldn't get stuck, like back in the old days when you were like in a railroad town, the railroad controlled, the company store and everything else. So it's kind of like that way with the vertically integrated utilities. If I put a power plant inside their service territory and I wanted to sell it to a neighboring utility, they could tell me, no, you can't use my wires. But with open access transmission, they had to offer those freely out there that on a non-discriminatory basis to anybody that was willing to pay their tariff price. And so it just opened up if you think about it, we had ice, we had this big, ice block in most of the parts of the country. And so we started to allow this to thaw out. The real key there is that when you start to liberalize some of that, you bring in a lot of outside investment, you bring in outside capital,
right,
and you bring in innovation. And so the first thing that happens is that folks, being economizing with their behavior, they look for what is the biggest margin opportunity and the big margin opportunity tends to follow the place where there's been a chronic underinvestment of capital, or there's an economic problem or some type of a physical constraint. And so that's exactly what we saw. We had folks that came in to build power generation in places where there had been a significant lack of investment over the years. Maybe the incumbent utility was not unwilling or unable to make that investment. And so it was a great thing in terms of spurring innovation. And to be honest with you, since the mid 90s, sometimes I don't like to think about it being almost 30 years ago. But if you look at the last 25 years in the power generation infrastructure in the United States, especially in the southern tier and California. But if you look at the power generation infrastructure, it just is a massive sea change in the types of generation that we have, the technologies that are used to generate electricity. In 25 years, we accomplished quite a bit there. And there was a whole history of delivering electricity for 100 years before without this same kind of massive technological change. Although we did bring nuclear facilities and some of those things beginning in the 50s and 60s, but outside of that, it was a massive change that occurred. And the important thing is that it wasn't all built on the backs of the ratepayers. You have private capital that came in to do some of these things.
Right.
So change the structure a little bit. So that's what was happening in the background at the kind of the aggregate wholesale level. And obviously there's definitely some regional differences in terms of maybe what we see in the Western United States, from Texas, and then in the Eastern United States, they're separate interconnections, they're separate transmission systems. So we definitely had some regionalization as these things played out. But you really can't have a robust retail competitive market if you don't have a robust wholesale competitive market. And so you have to start with the wholesale side, and then it provides the opportunity, but not the obligation to take that into the retail level. And so, in the retail, it still isn't super expansive across the US. There are a number of states that have opened up the electricity to retail competition. But it's a little bit of a spectrum. It's a sliding scale where it might be competition in name, but in practice, it's really not.
Right. There's one big company that controls all the little guys.
Right. Or there's some regulatory structure. Like we see this a lot in some of the states where you remember you deal with this today with in the area in and around Atlanta is whatever the incumbent utility, they usually have a tariff.
Right.
And so they might say, here's what the number is. And we go in every year and we ask for a rate change, or we have to justify our rates. And maybe there's a little fuel cost adjustment that gets to get put in there, but it's basically formulaic. It's not really market based. It's just kind of a formula. And the formula might lag by 6 months or something like that. So it's not really a just in time market type of effect. In some of the markets that have deregulated, what happens is that the incumbent there's still a tariff structure in place that's really it's not market based at all. And then you have the other participants that are looking at the real-time cost of fuel and all those different types of things. So what happens there is that tariff rate is either going to be massively under market or it's going to be massively over market, right? So because it's not really it's by definition a non-market based. And so it's kind of this weird kind of competition, but what it basically is you either go back to the tariff structure or you go to the competitive market when those two things are less expensive. But it ends up being kind of a little bit of a self-defeating. It looks like competition, but it's not really, because when the utility serves its customers on a tariff below their cost to serve, well, what happens? Well, then they go back and they recover those losses from everybody. So
somebody has to pay it.
That's right. So it looks like there's some opportunity, but at the end of the day, the ratepayers are kind of it's heads they win, tails you lose type situation. So it's not really a robust competitive environment there. Texas has been the most, much like the Georgia natural gas market, the Georgia natural gas market and the Texas retail electricity market are very, very, very similar. And so it's been a point where they actually took the vertically integrated utilities here and they blew them up into three pieces. So there was a generation company, they got split out from a wires company, from the marketing company that owned the customers. And so every retailer here is responsible for acquiring their customers. They're responsible for generating bills. They're responsible for collecting on those bills. And so it's a pure end-to-end, full, complete retail competition, competitive landscape here. And it's not really true, and the same is true in the gas markets there in Georgia, but there's not another power market in the US that kind of looks like, what we have here today. And so that's the retail competition side. That's, we may be the furthest example of that here, but there, I think that as time goes on and some of the in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, with the California energy crisis, there was this idea that was pushed forth, in addition to Enron, putting grandmas in the dark in California, whatever the narrative at the time was, that somehow California's situation had to do with them moving towards a competitive electricity market. And the reality is the problem that they had in California, in my opinion, was largely based on the lack of investment that was made in power generation infrastructure as well as transmission infrastructure. They really did have an energy crisis that had to do with demand increasing and they're having a problem with supply. So it was kind of woven into something different to give competition a black eye. But we see that over and over again. They're very powerful forces that don't want to keep their advantage. And so we see that time and time again. But I think that as time moves on, what'll happen is the areas that have competition will outcompete the areas that don't. And it allows a spurring of innovation that you just don't see in some of the other areas. So.
And I'm one of these that thinks that competition is always good, especially obviously for the consumer, because, we mentioned, Georgia electricity is not deregulated. I get one place I can buy our electricity from, happened to pay that bill earlier today. And, so they can charge whatever they want to charge. Now, they can't just all of a sudden triple our bills. I mean, there are, guidelines that and regulations that stop that. Right. But, really we are limited. And that causes problems when there are problems. If something goes down, there's only one company. I mean, but I also find it interesting that in some ways the government likes monopolies. And in other ways, the government says, "Oh, no, we don't like monopolies." And so that's always a fun conversation. But energy is, I think it's, something that for, 20, 30 years at least, has really been something that we have all been thinking about, whether it goes back to, the gasoline wars. I'm old enough. I remember sitting in line at gas stations to get gas, and you only could go at certain points in time. You could only get so much gas. I mean, it wasn't that you pulled up with a tanker and got, 100 gallons. And, then we've seen so many changes with energy, whether it's coal, water, wind, solar. That's been interesting to watch too, both good and bad. I mean, clearly there's lots of things. I'm from Colorado. I have a lot of family in Kansas. So wind farms, of course, are huge. And, and then you have environmentalists who say, no, they're not good. It's just kind of one of these things where you have to balance. But it's also a great place to be an entrepreneur right now. So tell us more about that, because I think so many people are like me, and, we're not in, we're in a regulated area. I've never lived in a market that wasn't. So I had no idea that you can even start doing some of these things. So, as if you're an entrepreneur, why is this a great time to be looking at energy?
So, the earliest adage that I got into, and I got into this space, energy never ever goes out of style,
Right.
ever.
We got to have it.
Yeah, and in some respects, electricity in particular is very much the entirety of our modern lifestyle is dependent upon reliable supplies of electricity on a cost-effective basis.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it'd be very difficult to have high-density population centers without electricity. You just got to move water places, and you got to move food places, and it's just not possible. Like, you just can't have the kind of urban living without water and power and things of that nature. So by its very definition, it's always good because it's a fundamental requirement in terms of what we're looking for. It's a fundamental good and service that we will consume and consume on a going forward basis. Two is that, it's not like it's, paper, you might make the same argument as the same thing, but our spend on energy, our overall spend as a percentage of our budget, whether that's in our vehicles, whether that's in our home electricity or whatever, it's a relatively large amount of spend of our disposable income. And so it's a pretty high value, it's a resource rich, from a cost perspective, product. Healthcare may be something similar to that, right? So healthcare is a fundamental type of thing that we really should have and absolutely have to have in certain situations. And it's a very large spend when it comes down to it. So I think those businesses are kind of similar. The positive news, though, in electricity has been that, we've been at this stage. I sort of laugh with my children. I've got one in college, one that's going to be a senior in high school, another one getting ready to go into high school. And I was laughing with my daughter. She was asking me something the other day, and I said, well, when your mom and I started working, there was no World Wide Web. Like, it was there, but
Al Gore hadn't invented it yet.
We were using dial-up service. Like, we had email and some of the other stuff. No one used it. But that was in 1995. And so the pace of change in technologies it's not just continuing. The pace of that change is rapidly intensifying.
Right.
And I think we get kind of lulled into not seeing it because we adopt stuff like someone was saying, oh, the iPhone's been around for forever. And you're like, well, no, I think that came out like 2009 or something.
I know,
like that,
really
right?
hasn't been forever.
It really wasn't. And so, we have these things and they change the way we do things so rapidly. And the same is true in power in the electricity space. So, 15, 20 years ago, wind was kind of a thing, but the state of change in terms of wind capacity and how we build wind generation facilities or wind farms or whatever you want to call them, the state of the art technology of what we have in wind today versus what it looked like 15 years ago is
very different.
It's not apples and oranges. It's apples and potatoes. They're not even the same animal. And the same is true of the solar facilities that we're dealing with. And we're dealing with the advent of a lot of other things in terms of the overall electrification. In many parts of the United States, we've had electricity is for lights, and maybe heating is on natural gas, or it's on propane, or it's on heating oil, or whatever have you. And there's been this slow change over time to try to make electricity displace some of those other fuels. And so we have this increase in electricity demand. We have and it's very seasonal. It's very peaky, so to speak, that introduces new opportunities and new challenges. So the thing that's interesting about electricity that's also a neat place for innovation is, I think electricity is something that we think we know a lot about because we touch it, hopefully not too closely, but we interact with it all the time. So much so that we just don't pay any attention to it.
Right. We flip the switch, something comes on. We flip the switch, it goes off. Yeah.
Right. And so you pay attention to it when it's kind of not there, but most people don't really understand all of the symphony that goes on behind the scenes to make sure power shows up
Right.
the way it does. And we very much, especially in the United States, take very much for granted the reliability of our power generation infrastructure. But power is this weird thing that at the grid scale and at the macro scale, we really can't store it. And so that's a very important thing that people, I don't think, really understand.
Yeah, it's not like you have gas, you have tanks of oil, but energy is, you can't.
Power doesn't work that way. And so it's interesting because literally, if you're going into your house and you're changing, you're increasing, it looks at what everybody else is doing, but theoretically, at least, if you turn a light switch on, some power plant someplace has to move a little bit to accommodate that in order to make sure it all gets delivered in the same way. So it's this ultimate, it's a commodity that's delivered at the speed of light. So it's produced, delivered, and consumed at the exact same time for all intents and purposes. And it's always a balancing act, and it's very difficult to do that. So we are introducing these other kinds of technologies in the power generation side. So we're introducing wind power. That is, the great news about that is that it's inexpensive. The fuel is free for all intents and purposes.
And there's always wind in these places that you're putting them.
Yeah, sometimes, but that's the problem, is that we have
things are changing.
Right. We have a lot of dependency on, we have power generation infrastructure that's been built to meet instantaneous demand, right? There's a the entire industry has organized itself around when people are trying to consume more electricity, we need to forecast what that demand is going to be. And we're trying to work to make sure that we have the resource availability to make sure we meet that demand whenever people, it's a bottomless well, right? People don't pay attention to how hard it is to do that sometimes. But as we add more and more of these other kinds of resources into the equation, well, they produce when they want to produce. And so all the other plants have to deal with demand volatility, but now they're also having to deal with supply side volatility as well. And so the bigger and bigger the proportion of our generation infrastructure that comes from these intermittent resources, the more stress it puts on the other plants that can move around. And so it incents people finding innovative solutions to some of these things. And so that's why it's just continuing to evolve. That's why it's a fundamental requirement. It's a fundamental part of modern life. It's a relatively large spend, and it's in the middle of changing. We're to say nothing of us adding electric vehicles and all the other things that will come, and what that means for infrastructure and what that means for just the wire side, let alone power generation facilities. And then we have these other emergent renewable energy technologies. So the ones that folks are terribly familiar with today we've had hydro or hydroelectric generation facilities. Those are going to be very regionalized. You have to have the right kind of infrastructure in place. And I'm not sure that from an environmental perspective, folks are too excited about damming up rivers anymore.
Well, and then, you have issues with, when that water level goes down. I mean, I'm, like I said, I'm from the West, and what's happening with Lake Powell is just incredible, and then when you stop and think, Las Vegas may not have power, that gets to be rather concerning for folks.
For sure. And so, that's why it's a great space. There's tons of room for someone to bring a better mousetrap into the equation and to figure something out, or to do something better, faster, cheaper, whatever the case might be, to bring that intellect to bear. And when you offer up real solutions, because there's such a large spend on energy, there's usually a pretty decent reward associated with being a better product to market.
Right. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. People finally, within the last 30, 40 years, really started recognizing we can't rely on just one source. It can't be just water. It can't be just solar. It can't be, because things happen. Now granted, the sun's probably going to, always keep going, but maybe you go through a weather thing where it's incredibly cloudy for a long time, and that decreases your solar. And so we're finally understanding that we have to have these multiple, it's kind of like having multiple revenue streams. We tell people it's great to diversify, because then if something happens in one or the other, everything else kind of shifts and balances. And so the cool thing is that's what drives innovation.
Right. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And that's one of the big reasons I like talking to folks like yourself. That's a big part of what we're trying to do at Energy Ogre is there's a big conversation that's happening not only at the national level in the United States, but I think is happening internationally as well. And a lot of it centers in and around climate change. And, there are definitely people on the extremes of both ends. And I'm not trying to advance any agenda on any of this stuff, but I think sometimes what happens is that, to your point, there's a lot of folks really feel like they need to do their part, and they personally take an interest in making sure they're part of a solution, not part of a problem. However, I think that there's a lot of bad information that floats around out there. Like, it would not be possible today. One of the things that I hear quite frequently is, well, hey, we could go 100% net zero today. We could get rid of we can power 100% of our requirements with solar and wind. We just lack the will to do so.
Right.
And technically speaking, I don't believe that's true. I mean, I don't see how that could possibly be done. It could be done if we didn't care about reliable electricity supplies. Like if we only really
because
wanted
wind and solar really do go up and down.
Right. And it's not, we know this. We know that this is a feature of what happens, and we will get there. I think that that's the direction this will get to anyway. But we still have to have, smart people come in and commercially deploy real commercial solutions in energy storage. Now, whether that's batteries, whether that's compressed air energy storage, whether that's big flywheels, whatever the case may be, that's a big part that's missing from the overall equation to be able to make that big transition.
Right. And each one of those remedies also has issues. One of the things that I was talking with some of my friends in Colorado about the huge fires that they had around Boulder several months ago. And they said, they were watching buildings burn because the fire department was focused on this one building. And people were like, why are they focused on that one building? Well, that's where they had a huge storage facility for the electric batteries for cars. And those are, if those would have blown, it would have been catastrophic, and it would have, highly toxic. I mean, all sorts of things. And we've heard the things, that, hey, you've got these great electric cars, but what do you do with the batteries? And all of these, your solar panels no longer work. Well, you've still got these big ugly things on your roof, and so, it's kind of one of those where we want it, but we also don't want to think about, hey, there might be other issues that we need to deal with.
Well, that's the key. Is I think that, your point is there is no free lunch on some of these things. And so there's definitely an issue with some of the first generation wind facilities of what happens. What do you do with the old turbine blades? Because they're not really very easily recyclable. And so what happens when those get to the end of their economic useful life? You've got a big structure in the middle of nowhere that, it's going to be costly to deconstruct this eyesore type that's sort of sitting out there.
And they're like fiberglassy. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
we just have to be smart about it all, right? And I think that that's what happens is we tend to overlook some of these things. But if we really allow folks to ponder these problems, I do think that we have an amazing ability to bring technological solutions to bear. It's just you can't keep them covered up. And so, if there's a better way for someone who's watching your podcast, or someone to come up with a better material science based solution on the blades themselves, that's, let's just say, compostable, or it's it's a carbon fiber based something that is cheaper, easy to manufacture, that has a great performance. These are the types of things that should win. For example, today, lithium ion is obviously the trend from batteries, especially in transportation vehicles. I don't think that's probably the right solution for stationary batteries that are grid scale types of batteries. But there's tons of innovation that's yet to come there, that I think someone's going to figure out, where you can use maybe like local metals or local types of things, as opposed to digging up other parts of the world for precious metals that you need for those things. So There's definitely a consequence to all those things. As long as we allow the market to focus on delivering up better solutions on a more cost-effective basis, we will get where we want to be. But protecting certain areas, I think, actually makes us work backwards.
Right. Yeah. And whether it's the company protecting things and not wanting to grow, or state, federal entities, things like that. Yeah. It's just, it definitely harms things in the long run.
Well, I love to hear that you have such a large international audience as well, because, one of the problems that we have in the US, I think we have this, and maybe this is true in Europe as well, but we have a little bit of this arrogance of, well, we've been doing this for so long, and, we have all these research institutions, and, we're going to innovate, and we'll have, these technological advancements trickle throughout the world. And in a lot of ways, I kind of expect it to go the other way around. We, like in your case, you talked about, with the incumbent utility, a new solution here that's dealing in a space that has an incumbent. Not only do you have to get over the regulatory stuff, but you have to overcome the incumbent.
Right.
And in other parts of the world, where you're talking about electrification, where there is no existing provider, if there's a better solution than running transmission lines from a centralized power plant, if some type of a distributed type generation infrastructure, or kind of cellular service, as opposed to kind of a grid scale service, if that makes more sense, then I think there are other parts of the world that will bypass the mistakes of building some of these costly pieces of infrastructure. Years and years ago, I was working with a company that was based in Indonesia, and on the island of Java. I had gone out there, and it was amazing. We had folks that I saw in some of the cities there that were on their phones, just like you would expect to see. They all look like my teenagers,
Yeah, your head's bent and your thumbs hurt because, right?
Yeah, and these are folks that are in very much a developing part of the world, and outstanding people. Love being there, and awesome place to visit. But I was talking to some of the folks there. I'm like, that's amazing. Like, who made that investment? Because you think about telecommunications, and I'm still thinking about it in terms of what I've been exposed to. Not. And they said, well, no, we did it way cheaper than you guys. You guys built all this copper infrastructure, and you guys built all this underground, and we just did it with cell towers. So they're able to, and their throughput on data is faster because they're not trying to use an antiquated technology because someone owned it and they still got to pay for it. They're able to leapfrog these technologies because they're not dependent upon the decisions that were made before. Right. And so that's very much how I expect some of these energy innovations to come, particularly in renewable energy and some of these renewable technologies in and around storage, where you're not trying to overcome or displace some incumbent some places. You're just trying to provide a solution. So I'm very eager to see how the rest of the world and or the developing world is really able to lead on some of these things, which I think is very likely.
Yeah, and and it is because they don't have that existing infrastructure. I talk with a lot of companies, and I say, well, why are you doing this process? Well, that's the way we've always done it. That's great, but that might not work now. But we hate change, and companies especially hate it when they're thinking, but this is the way we've always done it, and this is not only that, this is the way we've always made our money. And so I think we will see the companies that are innovative, that, and it could be, the small countries that say, hey, let's do this, or the companies. I mean, that is the nice thing about the US is we have such innovation. There are always people trying to figure things out and do things, in a better, different, faster way. And, I think we certainly have seen everything change through the course of time. And so it's interesting, it will be interesting in, say, 20 years to see, where do we get this?
Well, no question. I think one of the advantages that we have, in certain parts of the United States and Western Europe, and to say the Western world is in general, is we do have a have a culture of trying to foster innovation. I think we think that, right? Whether that's as true as we want to think it is. But really what happens is that our ability to organize capital to take advantage of those things is pretty straightforward. So we have a history of, if I were looking for project finance or looking for private equity or capital to pursue a specific business strategy, there's a lot of history, and there's a protocol and strategy associated with that. And there's a multitude of potential folks that we could, any one of us could talk to. Right. In some of the other parts of the emerging world, I don't think that there's quite some of that. So it'll be interesting to see how kind of finance changes over time through, cryptocurrencies or other types of ways to make those things happen, where you can bring those kinds of innovations to marry, smart people with good ideas with the capital that's necessary to make those ideas a reality.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when we start talking about things like venture capital, crowdfunding, I mean, all of those things, it's just so interesting to watch, and to see how, used to be, you had a new idea, you went to the bank, you got a loan, and all of those things. And now it's like, well, I'm going to do a Facebook post and holy schmoly, I got $40,000, or whatever. And, and venture capital. I mean, that's just, that is one of the things with people who have this, I don't want to say extra money, because in some cases it is extra, but some people, it's like, okay, I've got $100. What can I do with $100? Right. And crypto, I think, really is going to be one of the, crypto just confuses me. That's, but that's an innovation in innovation. I mean, to see what's going to happen.
The fact that you can fund things that don't require a financial intermediary to make that work, just in terms of allowing capital will flow into the best ideas. Obviously there's risks and other issues associated with that, but I think all these things collectively, we talked about the pace of technological advancement. These things it's like we're pouring more gas on the fire, right? It's just going to make the pace of that potential change happen that much faster, which I think for us as a species is probably a good thing, because it allows us to fix some of these issues that we continue to run up against, whether it's how do we feed a global population, how do we make sure that we have stable, reliable electricity supplies, and we're being good custodians of the environment that we live in. So these things are all, in my opinion, technological or technical issues that I think us continuing to foster that kind of an environment is a net positive. And so the good news is, if you have folks like your viewership that are entrepreneurial in spirit, that have an idea, it's such an amazing thing, because we having the ability to bring those ideas and to be rewarded for doing some of those things, we need to foster that and continue to maintain that.
Right. And I think one of the cool things that has happened, and I think it was sped up because of the pandemic, I think it was already happening, was, the fact that we are now connecting with people around the world all the time. So, I mean, like I don't network in person anymore. Haven't for 2 years. I network with people from around the world. And so that's where I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of those discussions taking place. Because yes, we're still this great big world, but ooh, look, click, click, and we're connected with everybody.
No question. And I think it also, I think, some of that stuff we might've been out, a cart was a little bit before the horse, just in terms of being able to, plug into all this information and plug into being able to access folks that it kind of outstripped our ability sometimes, I think, to be able to discern fact from
confusing.
Fiction. Right. And so I think that's that's evolving by itself as well. So it's an amazing technology that allows us to spread ideas and information, for better or for worse.
Right. Yeah, because we spread information, we also spread misinformation.
Right.
And
whether we intend to or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah. And so that's where we have to do the research, we have to do things, but yeah, it's an exciting time for all this, and it doesn't matter what the innovation is. It's just incredible to see how things are changing.
That's why I think, this particular medium in the podcasting, one of the consequences associated with sharing information is that it all competes for our attention. And so what happens is that the information gets, truncated into smaller and smaller components, that it starts to lose some of the fidelity of what. It's not that someone's trying to not be honest. It's just in terms of trying to compete for attention, they may not know any better. But, in energy specifically and power specifically, it's a complicated subject. These ideas that I run into, you'll see folks that you can't do 2 hours of research on Google and Twitter and become a subject matter expert. Right? So usually the big problems are a big problem, not because there's a lack of will to fix them. It's because they're complicated.
Right.
And so this format of talking about, of having an in-depth, long-form conversation that really is able to, hey, let's dig in a little bit more around what are some of these issues and what are the problems with moving to renewables like we've been talking today? What are the positives associated with that? So very, very important in this day and age.
Right. Well, let's talk about specifically Energy Ogre and how that works, because, I was reading on your website. It sounds very cool. Obviously it's in Texas. Georgia is not deregulated, so can't do anything like that here. But it's an interesting concept as to how you can do this. So tell us how Energy Ogre works.
Sure, I'll run through this, and not for the specifics of it, but maybe somebody else is watching or listening to this and can think of an analog to what they're doing. But basically, what happened in Texas was we opened January 1st of 2002, and it was a big, huge boon to consumers here. So it coincided with the massive investment in generation infrastructure, and has kept a pretty good lid on cost increases for customers here over the last 20 years. So it's been a huge positive. But one of the issues that we saw kind of early on is, in the old days, we had one tariff, or maybe you had a different plan with the regulated utility. You could get two types of service. Well, now all of a sudden we have, 140 different providers that might have 15 different plans. Right. So you just end up getting to this point where you have an overwhelming number of choices.
And whatever the big button in the yellow print is, oh, that looks good. And that's what you go with, right?
That's right. And so the good news, the bad news is, there was that old ad a long time ago, Burger King, have it your way, right? So you can have a plan that's tailored. If you work nights, and you want to optimize your electricity plan to someone that's not home at night and is home all day long, well, there's a plan for that. If you're somebody that has a vacation house and you're never there, then there's a plan that is optimized for some of those things. But it's just very difficult, I think, for people to look through those numbers of options and to really be able to do the calculations and the math associated with which is the best fit for them. So
and people don't even know they exist. I mean, that's the thing.
Right. And that's definitely educating folks that there are other options was a big issue for us at the beginning of this opening. So what we did was, we started to look at some of these problems over the years of things that were causing sub-optimizations that were really affecting consumers. And a couple of big ticket items out there that we saw. One, nobody had ever fully aligned themselves with the consumer. So sometimes we had folks that would come in that would say, hey, I'm a broker or I'm an interested intermediary in this process, but I'm going to make a margin depending upon the terms. But no one had ever stepped in like, hey, we're 100% on your side. Your interest is first, basically as a fiduciary to say, how would we look at your situation and manage your house like it was our house? So kind of bringing some of that technical expertise, putting that in the hand of the average consumer that doesn't care to waste their time educating themselves on all the minutia. So that was one. Two was really the move to cloud computing that we saw emerge in post 2010, for lack of a better time frame. really was a pretty big sea change, because now what happened is the ability of companies like ours to not have to buy dedicated rack space and dedicated computers and dedicated processing power.
Right.
Now I can use processing capacity I can variabilize my cost structure
Mm-hmm.
to use that on an as necessary basis. And so what that amounted to is our ability to receive, store, transform, and use processing power to transform data was a fraction of the cost of what it would have looked like before, taking advantage of these emergent technologies. And what we found was the ability to take all these different rate plans, no matter where we found them, and basically deconstruct them down and create curves out of them all. And once we created curves out of them all, we can analyze them all relative to each other. It doesn't matter what provider it is, or what name was on it, or what bell and whistle was there. But what happened is our machine learning and some of the other things that we're able to do were able to allow us to look at all those plans on an apples to apples basis. And so what we've done is we've tried to bring in applied technologies. So we're always looking for these emergent types of technologies, and how do we bring them into a commercial application that's intended to benefit a particular constituent. In our case, it's the end consumer or our customers. And that's really what Energy Ogre has been all about. At its core, we're a technology business that's kind of wrapped in this customer service candy coating to make it easy to simplify this process. But it happens to be focused on retail electricity today. But what happens is we know that each one of these customers has a unique demand profile. So we have a demand curve, and we might have 1,000 different supply curves. So we can fit the two in the one that just mathematically is the lowest cost to serve that particular demand profile. So that's what Energy Ogre has been in a nutshell, is to really unlock the value of the competitive market for the average consumer here in Texas by doing all the hard work and trying to simplify this process to the greatest extent possible, utilizing these emerging technologies.
Right. So, and it is a complicated process, and my brain kind of shorts out on some of these things. So, say I'm a consumer, am I paying you for my electricity? And so I'm no longer dealing with all of these, other entities. And then you're just kind of shifting where, to get the best possible service.
Right. So we're not the provider. So we'll set up service with individual providers on behalf of our customers.
Okay.
And they might switch, once every 6 months or once every 12 months. But
when
we'll
things
continue
change.
to look. We'll continue to look if something material happens in the marketplace and there's a better opportunity, then we'll make our customers aware of that and process that. So the goal here is just to do all of the administrative things, or as many of the administrative things as we can, so that the customer doesn't have to worry about it. The goal here is to keep people in that bottom quartile or the bottom decile of prices, so that they're constantly in the most competitive area of the market, no matter what is happening, right? We can't influence exactly what the rates are, but we can make sure that folks are at the bottom end of whatever the market is.
Right. So they're a member of your
That's right. It's a
Energy Ogre.
subscription service, and they're with us. And we look at it. We continuously monitor what's happening with them, with their account, with their provider. Assist them with any issues as we look through the bill doesn't look right, or if there's some other type of a problem. That's another issue that we see here sometimes is, customer service is a little bit of a lost art form.
It doesn't exist, especially if you're a big company. You're like, I don't care.
Right. And so that's a lot of folks might, if they have a question about their bill or they have a problem or something like that, a lot of the providers here, you might be on hold for an hour or whatever have you. And in our case, we'll just take care of that.
Okay.
So we folks contact us, they make us that point of contact. We'll handle what we can handle behind the scenes, just to make it as easy of an experience as we possibly can.
Right. So let's go from the other side, back to the entrepreneur side. If someone's interested in doing something like this, in a nutshell, because we've only got about 5 minutes left, how would they even think about starting a company like this?
Well, I think, at the end of the day, I think anyone would tell you from an entrepreneurship perspective, the first thing is you have to have a solution to maybe an issue, or a solution that sort of solves a problem that folks may not even know that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way I think the first thing to do there is to look at what that is and to really start to try to assess what's the economic opportunity around doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's so many different parts and pieces in the overall energy space,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's, folks running propane trucks all the way through to electricity storage or solar installations for residential, or putting battery backups in residential or small commercial installations. That's kind of what we're looking for. So, an example might be in California, in certain parts of Northern California, if you're paying attention, they have these issues where in a high wind conditions, PG&E shuts down the infrastructure, the power infrastructure there. Mm-hmm. And so that can create some hardships for folks that are, purposefully having their power interrupted for 3 days at a time or whatever have you. So, there may be an opportunity for someone to look at, and I'm sure they're doing that already today, is to say, is there a solution that you can use a battery and a whole home generator,
a whole house generator,
vehicle? And how does that all work? And what do the economics look like for that? And what are the selling points to that? And what are, what's the manufacturing timeline look like for those facilities? And what are the local regulations associated with those small, there's so many different types of things, but it all starts from solving a problem. We're looking at a segment of the marketplace that's underserved, and really putting together a business plan and a strategy associated with that. So you've got your arms around it before you can definitely dive in with both feet and figure it out as you go. But sometimes I've found that it's a little bit easier to try to get your arms around what am I thinking of and what am I not thinking of, and really try to stress test your ideas and look at how sensitive the economics of what you're trying to do are to the little assumptions that you're making along the way.
Right. And I think comes back to what we were saying before. It's looking for those opportunities. We're seeing, okay, there's this going on. So maybe whole house generators is a good business to get into, or, we were saying, maybe stuff's going to be cellular. Okay, well, maybe you need to start thinking about something like that. But it's just being open to the possibility that there are all these opportunities out there.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd love to do is to try to figure out what are these emerging technologies that are out there and how do I apply them? So is there a better application of something that's coming down the pipe, whether that's in software to perform a function or apply something in an area that no one's, doing that today? And there's a lot of innovation, there are a lot of inventions, but a lot of times the folks that invent things, invent materials, invent ideas, invent software, there's a challenge in commercializing some of those technologies. And that's almost, it is not almost, it is absolutely a special skill set associated with that. And there's ample room, I think, in energy as well as a bunch of other places for folks that can fit that bill.
Right. Well, and there's certainly that this was designed for this, but can we make it do that?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And I think that's one of the things where people really need to be open to. Well, oh my gosh, Jesson, this has been so fascinating. We need to continue this discussion because obviously energy is not going to go away and these conversations are going to continue. For people in Texas, if you're interested, it's energyogre.com.
That's right.
And so I encourage that. But how do people find you and connect with you if they have questions or, want to run ideas past you, things like that?
For sure. Well, if it's related to Energy Ogre or anything that we have going on here, run to our website. There's some information. You can contact me off of the site. And, to your point, if someone's in Texas listening to this, we try to make some free resources. We've got blog posts I think are applicable to people in all parts of the country of how to change or what to be thinking about. If you're looking at maybe adding rooftop solar or something like that, what are the things to look out for. But in addition, in Texas, if you're here and you don't know if I'm right for you or if Energy Ogre is the right kind of, we have some free tools on the website so you can figure out what you're paying today, whether that's above market or how close to market are you with where you are today. So I think a lot of people are kind of surprised because they haven't looked at it in a while.
Again, they don't know it exists.
Yeah, generally speaking, in Texas, in these competitive areas that are open, if you haven't really looked at it in a few years, you're almost guaranteed to be paying too much. So definitely, even if I'm not helping you, you need to look at it closely and make a better decision. So
and like you said, there's a lot of great resources on your website, whether you're in Texas or not.
Right. We try to make sure that, again, education and trying to be a resource to folks as they're trying to navigate this stuff, whether we can help them in our core business or just provide them good information. It's a big part of what I hope to accomplish. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity with your platform to speak to folks, and really have enjoyed having a chance to do so.
Cool. I love it. I love it. It's always such fun conversations. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
No, I think that, I really see a lot in the media, and there's a huge push on people wanting to be very focused on renewables and really take charge and be part of a solution. And what I'd say to folks is, I think that's going to happen one way or the other. And you definitely continue to be part of the solution. Don't get anxiety ridden about some of these things. I think there are good solutions that are coming. The pace of technological change, I think, makes that almost an assuredness that is going to occur. But don't get caught paying too much, or don't gloss over what the costs are to forcing this maybe to happen faster than it should. So.
Cool. I love it. Well, as I said, we have to continue this discussion because it has been so fascinating. I'm Deb Creer. I've been talking with Jesson Bradshaw of Energy Ogre. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.